Even if you're in the first few weeks of your company, there's very little that will prepare you for what that feels like if you're a first-time founder. It's not just the hours, it's the weight of the world. The goalposts always move. That was the thing I noticed as a founder too. We'd raise our seed round and be like, we did it. And then it's just like, oh my God, we have these Series A targets. With your aims and your goals constantly shifting, that stress never really goes away. I think founders get really excited when they hear that we've done it before and that we've been in the YC ecosystem.
Season 4, welcome back. Happy New Year, everybody. Well, I'm pretty excited about this because it's your turn to step it up. We've already have for like a half a dozen recorded episodes and some pretty impressive managers. So we're gonna kick off 2026 with a bang. In case you haven't been paying attention, we've been posting a bunch of musings. We call them appetizers on our website, slice.fund. We have a pretty headstrong opinion about accelerators. We frankly think they're dog shit. With the rare exception, obviously, there is always an exception to the rule, and that exception is Y Combinator. And I think we're a little bit harsher in our written piece, so go check it out. However, today, you are interviewing someone special. Tell us about it.
Yes, we have Ryan from Spot YC. He and Jay are together 3 times former YC founders. Ryan has gone through YC in the summer of 2016 with his company called Autumn. He started it with his late co-founder who he unfortunately lost. So we talk about what it's like going through grief of losing a co-founder, which is obviously very painful and very hard. And now he's building Spot with Jay, writing checks into YC companies.
I mean, there is a whole plethora of these funds that focus on YC companies. There is YC's own fund that focuses on this stuff. Why do we like them more than anybody else?
You're just going to have to listen to the episode. Ryan, welcome to the Slice Pod, where we uncover the stories of fresh emerging managers across the early stage venture landscape. You're the co-founder and general partner of Spot VC, a $20 million fund investing $75K checks exclusively into Y Combinator companies. But before all of this, you had a PhD in clinical psychology, you were a YC founder, and you started angel investing. What drew you to clinical psychology initially?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I was a psychology major in college and I kind of gravitated towards it. Both my parents are clinical psychologists as well, so it's a bit of a family business. I had always gravitated towards it. My parents actually ran a home practice, so there was a sense in which I felt connected to their work, and I asked them about it a lot. I enjoyed studying in college and ended up applying to PhD programs 1 year after graduating from college. And I was a little young for the PhD program, but I ended up getting in and just pursued it, and no regrets. I learned so much. I grew so much as a person. I was one of 6 people in my PhD class, and I ended up marrying one of those people, which is great. You learn a lot from your professors, but you learn a lot from the people in your cohort as well. I feel like I learned some of my most valuable life lessons in my 20s during that period. It was great.
I can imagine you've learned so much studying psychology for such a long period of time. And I know there's a skill you've talked about, breaking down someone's personality in like 30 to 60 minutes. And I think that applies to you as an investor. Most people say that they're looking for a chip on their shoulder or some sort of resilience, but I presume you have a little bit more nuance than that. So I'm curious, what are your patterns that you've observed in the very best founders?
That's a good question. Working in hospitals, you have to move very fast when you're seeing a patient for the first time. You do an intake, somebody comes in, and you have to quickly assess them to get them to the right place. Doing a lot of reps on that, it means you're just pattern matching. That skill has proven pretty critical, especially investing in the YC ecosystem, where you typically get one call. I joke around with Jay, my partner in the fund, and say I used to identify pathology in people and try to get them to the right place, help them in whatever way they needed and wanted. And now I feel like I'm identifying pathology that I think will enable them to build a multi-billion-dollar company. We also pitch me as a clinical psychologist as somebody who can help. Having sat in the founder seat for so long myself, as did Jay, we know that it can be a really difficult 10-year process. Before we started recording, we were talking about how my daughter was born on the day we launched the beta version of our app, which my company was called Autumn, which I'm sure we'll talk about. And I had pulled an all-nighter the night before, and she showed up a week early. It was a long couple of months, just trying to keep working, keep grinding. And I had that chip on my shoulder at the time. I had that desire to succeed at all costs. And that was critical in order to power through moments like that. When it comes to our founders, we really pride ourselves on being their first call, not necessarily to even talk about the company, just to talk about co-founder dynamics and something going on in their personal lives. And that has actually paid off in big ways on the investing side, getting in early on a founder's next company.
We're definitely in a relationships business, and we'll get into Spot and what you and Jay are building together. But before that, I want to talk about Autumn, where in 2015, you and your co-founder Christian started, which was turning long-form journalism into audio. How did you go from clinical work to building a startup company in this space?
Yeah, I mentioned I met my wife in the PhD program, and in our fourth year, she ended up needing a spinal fusion surgery, which pretty much took her out of commission for a year. We weren't married yet, but it seemed like it was going in that direction. So I decided to take a year off as well. I ended up working at a startup in New York and just kind of on a lark, and ended up just becoming enamored with the culture, how fast paced it was. I don't think I really had put this together at the time, but I was also a musician for a number of years and would have loved for that to have worked out, but that's a tough industry. I loved performing, being on stage, recording, all those parts of it. I didn't realize that there's something very entrepreneurial about being a musician, right? You're creating something, then you're putting it out in the world, and you're trying to figure out how to get it in front of people. And when I was working at the startup, I immediately connected back to that. And I thought, oh man, this is what I want to do. The culture was so fast paced and crazy. The concept of building something and putting it in front of people, I knew is what I wanted to do. So after finishing the degree and having a couple of critical experiences as a psychologist, I worked at the VA for a year. That sort of really informed a lot of my worldview today. The first thing I did was start this company with Christian. We just were tossing ideas around, and this one resonated because I had just moved from New York to LA, and I spent a lot of my time on the subway reading. All of a sudden I was in the car all the time and had missed out on a lot of the articles and things like that. I prided myself on being up to date on this. Felt like the natural next step for me starting a company. We didn't have backgrounds in media, but we clawed our way into the room. It was during a time when the Atlantic or the New Yorker would take a meeting with two dudes and an idea. So the timing was really good. We ended up doing Y Combinator in the summer of 2017. Talk about one of those experiences that you'll never forget. Jay, my co-founder in the fund, was also in the summer 17 batch at YC. He was the first person that Christian and I met because his company furnished our apartment in Menlo Park. So Jay had a rental company. Jay has remained a friend ever since then. And my entire professional network is pretty much YC at this point.
YC was a completely different place in 2017 than what it is now. And I'm curious your thoughts on that and how it's changed. But also, what type of musician were you?
I was a drummer. So I was in bands, lugging my drum set all over New York City and playing shows in the Northeast. I never was able to fully do the struggling musician thing. I was either holding a job in psychology or in school or something like that. But I loved it, and I do miss performing a lot. Hopefully one of these days I'll get back into it. YC used to be run out of Mountain View, and now it's in SF. And I remember when Christian and I did YC, I think I went to San Francisco like once or twice. I remember working out of the YC offices. I remember Sam Altman was there and he was telling me about this thing he was working on called OpenAI. I think our batch, maybe the batch before ours, was the first one to cross 100 companies. In that sense, it looked like it does today. There were batches that got over 200, maybe even 250 companies in the early 2020s. So that was obviously very different. But we had 2 group partners at the time. I think now there's like 4 or 5 group partners that you have, and you get 1 primary partner. That's a little bit different now. We really had 2 group partners who were fully focused on us. Outside of that, I still think it's remarkably similar to how it used to be, especially under Gary's leadership right now. I feel like he's really tried to bring YC back to its roots and really focus on seed and that first stage. Valuations have gone up a lot. That's definitely different. But I think that culture, that energy, if anything, it feels just as strong as it did in 2017, maybe even more so, just because we're in this platform shift moment. You're bringing in so many young founders. I think I've talked to more MIT dropouts in the last 6 months than I've ever have in the past. I think YC is doing a really good job of recruiting in top talent and building in just incredibly pivotal moment in tech.
It seems like the summer at YC was really pivotal for you guys that autumn, leading you to the New York Times acquisition in 2020. I think it was March. And you literally closed that deal 3 hours before the COVID trading halt. What was that moment like?
It was pretty wild. It was very early in the morning for me because I was on the West Coast. And it felt like it happened really suddenly, even though I'm trying to think back to that time because it feels like ages ago. I remember we had been in 6 months of diligence. I had another newborn. It was a lot for sure. The New York Times diligence process is robust. Who knows what would have happened if the deal hadn't closed? We had a big pocket of growth after COVID, which was kind of surprising because we felt like so many of our users were commuters. And nonetheless, people said they just found reasons. They took more walks with the dog. It was pretty wild to finally get to the finish line, and then the world just completely shut down. You didn't even have time to appreciate it. I had a trip planned with a buddy to celebrate, and I just had to cancel it and figure out what to do with the kids. It was definitely a wild sequence of events. Christian and I spent the next several months figuring out how to let go in a lot of ways. They weren't our decisions to make anymore about the direction of the product.
It seems like it was well timed with that exit. I remember like the boom of Clubhouse soon after, and the podcasting just skyrocketed.
Yeah, it's interesting because when we started Autumn, everyone was like, we're in the golden age of audio. It was right after Serial, and there were these breakout hits that people were just sitting around a couch and listening to together. It was so different. And it's interesting to think that we exited amid another massive boom. One of the things I do, because I want to stay plugged in, is I sit on the board of KCRW, which is the local LA NPR affiliate out here. It's interesting to see how an organization like that is navigating everything from what's happening with the government to how people are spending their time, what they're listening to. When I was at the Times, it was really interesting to see this trend towards watching podcasts instead of listening to them. It's gone through really cool phases. Yeah.
Fascinating. Congratulations.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. And for those who don't know, Christian passed away just 8 months after the New York Times acquisition. That must have been an incredibly difficult time. I read your letter that you posted. And only if you're comfortable sharing, we can totally skip this question. How did you find your way back to building first with angel investing, then Switch Ventures, and now you're building Spot with Jay?
Yeah, so totally comfortable talking about it. It was one of the hardest things I've ever had to cope with. I write about this, but the critical part of it for me was once he was gone, I really started to appreciate how much you as co-founders go through together that really nobody else understands. We were both married during the autumn period, and it's morbidly ironic, but my wife and Christian's wife referred to themselves as YC widows when we moved to the Bay Area. There's this component around like our families know what we went through, but day to day, you're spending hours just in the trenches with this person, navigating intense stress. there are little moments when you're doing a company with somebody that I think it's really easy to forget about them. There's the obvious watershed moments, like signing with the New Yorker, signing with the Atlantic, and getting acquired by the New York Times. But there are little things that you really appreciate when you're just like, oh my God, there's so much stuff he probably remembered that I don't remember. And I think that honestly, that was one of the hardest parts about it, knowing that so much was lost with him. After the acquisition, Christian flagged a company in the batch that year that we both ended up angel investing in. I actually think that Christian would have gotten into this. I think he was always he's kind of a builder. I honestly think he would have had a podcast by now. I actually started angel investing a little bit before that as well, just focusing on YC companies. I didn't have energy or time to go out and diligence companies in any meaningful way. Knowing that a company was going through YC and maybe was going through with Jared Friedman or Gustav Alstromer, who were my group partners, I found it to be really fun. I think I was a little bit less sure how I would feel as somebody who had actually raised a fund and was managing money. If anything, it's been more fun, honestly. It's been such a blast. I think being able to invest in the number of companies in each batch has felt really freeing instead of being like, should I pick this one company? Maybe two. Maybe I'll skip the next batch. Just to be consistently deploying into these batches has been really, really fun. I think Jay and I are really enjoying it. I was talking to another YC investor and we were laughing about how neither of us would meet our criteria for investment anymore. The talent level is so high right now. You got to be a killer. You got to be out there and ready to get it done at all costs. I lived in Pacific Palisades, and in January, my house burned down. I was thinking about how the founder I would have invested in would have been working on his company the next day. I was that founder at one time, but I'm not that guy anymore. Knowing that you don't meet your own criteria is very strange, but it's also incredibly liberating to know that you can draw on the skill set that you've developed over the last decade and impart some of that wisdom and knowledge on the founders that you invest in, and do so in a way that's very much in line with how YC does it. I think Jay and I really like to think of ourselves as an extension of the YC partnership in as many ways as we can be.
Your first couple angel investments, were they Pika and Entocycle? What brought you to cutting those checks initially?
So Pika was in our batch, and I remember just thinking it was super cool. They had the hardware there at demo day. I didn't know those founders as well. They weren't in my small group of founders that I worked with on a weekly basis. What a moonshot and cool idea. They had this long-term goal of autonomous electric aircraft. It's so hard to get your hours with the FAA out here. And they had such a cool idea, which was to take their plane overseas. They started in New Zealand and ended up in South America, where regulation is a lot less strict. They started a crop dusting business using their planes and immediately started generating revenue. And they are still doing that to this day. And they're a Series B company. That's been a really fun one to watch mature over time.
Yeah, and especially for people who you built alongside with, I can only imagine that win feels even greater. How did you end up graduating from angel investing? I know you went to Switch Ventures for a little bit. Was that the catalyst for you where you learned what building a fund could look like, and then you decided to formalize the fund with Jay?
Yeah, pretty much. We were very lucky to have some wonderful seed investors in Autumn. We had Paul Arnold from Switch Ventures, who remains a good friend to this day. We also had Charles Hudson from Precursor. I consider Paul and Charles to be real mentors for me entering into this more formalized investing profession. I sat on their YC desk and vetted the batches. We would run all this data from YC through their model, and it was interesting to see who elevated to the top. Paul's in the business of taking however many positions he does a year, maybe 25 or 30. He's looking for ownership, and he's looking to be a big part of the round. And that's really hard. Paul's been grinding it out for a long time doing this, and he's really, really good. I didn't know if I wanted to go compete and elbows out for a lot of these deals. So that was, I think, another thing I picked up along the way as well. Being in YC, I got to see what a lot of collaborative venture looks like with Box Group and SV Angel is sort of this shining example of funds who are not competing with others and are taking more bets, relying on their ability to pick many winners, not just a small handful. So talking to Paul, and I also remember having a conversation with Jared Friedman, my group partner at YC, as I was winding down my tenure at the Times. And I was like, what do I do next? And he said, why don't you raise a fund? And it hadn't even occurred to me that I was capable of doing something like that. As a founder and an operator, hearing encouragement from Paul and guys like Charles makes you feel like you're capable of doing it. And that helps. That goes a long way when you're jumping the tracks into essentially a new career, even though I haven't had to learn too much outside of my own knowledge base. This maybe just understanding the relationship between GP and LPs and how to raise capital for a fund, which is different than raising for your company. Those kinds of inputs were really important for me to feel like I could do it. And I also knew I didn't want to be a solo GP. Timing worked out really well with Jay. We had stayed friends for many years. We'd never really invested together or done any sort of deal sharing, but it has felt very natural. Being in that founder and operator mentality has taken us a long way just from getting from 0 to 1 with this fund.
You mentioned that you guys were both alumni of the same batch in the summer of 2017. So you've known each other for like 8+ years at this point. I'm curious, like, what was the moment you guys decided to do this together, especially because you've historically had different tastes in companies, founders. Why team up?
We ran into each other at demo day at the end of last year, and I didn't even know he was going to be there. And we said, let's get dinner afterwards. We started talking about his experience as a full-time VC and some of the investing that he had done and that I had done. Yeah, it was one of those light bulb moments where it's just like, hey, we could do this together. Let's just give it a shot. A lot of pieces fell into place from there. Having a co-founder is such a superpower. Not that we don't invest in solo founders. Some of my favorite investments have been in solo founders. Jay was a solo founder in the summer of 2017, and he did YC again in the summer of 23.
You guys are like two peas in a pod. You've made 29 investments together now across the summer 2025 batch and the fall 2025 batch. How do you guys actually make decisions now? You've had the chance to do it for almost a year now.
We don't need consensus. I don't see it as bad signal when there's not consensus. I see more negative signal when we're both lukewarm on a company. That's usually a pretty good indicator that it's probably not it for us. It's not the one. There are companies that definitely fall into the extreme buckets where it's an obvious pass for us very quickly. And then there are ones where we literally commit on the call. It's one of the things I love about our model is that we can do that. We have enough dry powder that we can show conviction immediately in the founder. And I think that goes a long way. Jay and I review every single company in the batch independently. We each assign an initial interest score. In the summer batch, those scores were actually pretty aligned. In the fall batch, they weren't, which is great. So we ended up taking more calls in the fall batch and ended up passing a bit more. We were pretty patient in the fall batch. And the companies eventually came to us that felt ultimately quite obvious. Now, in retrospect, as they've gone on to raise great rounds with great leads, but I think even also at the time. So I would say on the whole, there doesn't need to be consensus. We don't need to be a yes at the end of it. In fact, we've ascribed each of us a silver bullet where I could be like, we shouldn't do this. And Jay can be like, I'm using it. We're doing this one. We haven't had to do that yet. There's never been a moment where one of us has felt like this is not good. But there are definitely instances where one of us is trying to pull the other across the finish line. The most fun ones, though, are when you're just like, yes, this one. That's easy. I think we've honed in on a really good model and framework. We spent a lot of time before our first investments in the summer batch trying to figure out what we were looking for in a founder. It was helpful for me too to have that framework of these traits in founders that we were looking for, and me thinking like, I think I can identify that pretty fast in somebody. So, those, when you find that founder who's like just maniacally obsessed with the problem that they're solving, has already turned down acquisition offers, you get really excited. There's a lot of companies that we've invested in the last two batches where my mentality around the founders is, if it's not this one, it's going to be the next one. There's just that high degree of talent. And Jay and I have been following YC batches since 2017. The summer batch was incredible. We were just blown away. We were passing on companies we would have gladly angel invested in, and we couldn't believe our luck that we were the second or third check-in to any given company. Similar in the fall batch. I think the talent level has skyrocketed, and more people are trying to start a company right now who know they have the chops for it. It feels very different than the early 2020s, which was so frothy. There were a lot of tourists, not only among founders, but VCs as well.
You're at the forefront of exciting innovation. So let's talk about your unfair advantage, because there are multiple YC focused funds in the landscape now. What's interesting about you guys is that you get early looks into the batch. You see all the companies, so you need to move really fast. What's the screening process you do? Why do you think those founders take your check, especially as one of the first checks?
Yeah, I would actually add a lot of the times it's more than 2 weeks prior. You asked me earlier what's different about YC. There is one major difference I didn't say, which is how people raise coming out of the batch. Nowadays, you formally kick off your fundraise like a week or two before demo day, and you're meeting with big funds in the final week. It was heads down during the batch when I did it, and you would not meet investors until demo day. For Jay and me, I think we are first starting by looking at what a founder is working on, trying to see if we connect with it. But we're also trying to actually find a video of the founder talking. That's something we sort of scour the internet for as fast as we can. I think you can get a lot of signal just hearing a founder talk about their product, even if it's just a product demo. I feel like I learn a lot about how they're talking about their product. That is something that will initially get our attention. We know all the group partners, so we'll check in about a given company and we'll say, hey, this person being on our radar, we were wondering about this part of what they're building or their strategy, and we'll get an answer. And that's an important part of the inputs that we take in as well. Our pitch to these founders is, we've done this before, and that goes a long way. One of the first things we pitch is my PhD. Even when you're just a month and a half into the batch and you've been working 100+ hour weeks, it's going to be intense. Even if you're in the first few weeks of your company, there's very little that will prepare you for what that feels like if you're a first-time founder. It's not just the hours, it's the weight of the world. The goalposts always move. That was the thing I noticed as a founder too. We'd raise our seed round and be like, we did it. And then it's just like, oh my God, we have these Series A targets. With your aims and your goals constantly shifting, that stress never really goes away. I think founders get really excited when they hear that we've done it before and that we've been in the YC ecosystem. They'll check in with their group partner and they'll be like, yeah, these guys are great. You should talk to them. You should take their money. And that reputational aspect of things is what Jay and I really strive for internally in the YC alumni and current founder community. It's critical for us to get in there. I think the other thing is we run a specific program that I think caters to our abilities. We invest in 12 to 15 companies a batch. I think that allows us to take a lot of bets, make sure we're not squeezed out of any rounds, but we can also give a lot of time to these founders. And we're not just thinking about our reputations internally, we're also thinking about, hey, will this founder give us an allocation at the Series A? That also feels really important to us. And we want to jump to helping as fast as we can in ways that we're specifically able to. So that part of things has felt really critical for us. There was a company in the summer batch. We got introduced to the founder and we were so impressed with her. We have like 30 40-minute conversation with her at demo day, and she had raised a round already, and it was a big round. We asked, we have one check left. We'd love to invest. And she was like, she didn't say the round is closed, but she was signaling that it didn't look good for us. But one of our other portfolio founders happened to be standing nearby, and he didn't even know this founder, but he walked over and he said, let me talk to you for a second. They had a sidebar conversation, and she came back over and she gave us a handshake on the spot. If there's a time we're having trouble getting into a hot deal, we'll rely on our founders to help us. And I think for the founders that are really trying to vet their investors, they'll hear really good things about us. And that's how it works.
Yeah, and I think you're alluding to Daedalus Labs.
That was Daedalus Labs.
You've had incredible early markups, and let's talk about how you're thinking about pricing, because as you mentioned, the prices are quite expensive. And under Gary's leadership, YC has become the benchmark for AI founders, arguably the last relevant accelerator. You're entering around 30 million caps. Do you think that's the new normal, or is this just a moment in time?
I think it's probably the new normal. It's strange for it to be the new normal, but the markups we've seen in the last two batches, over half of our companies have been marked up or raised on higher valuations. We're not necessarily marking them up internally, but it's funny, when we came out of YC, we raised on an $8 million cap, and that felt high at the time. You're looking at a 3-4x change in valuations over the last 8 years. When we were initially modeling out our fund, we were banking on a lower entry point, which is what we had seen the year prior. So these caps have definitely come up. There was a company in the fall batch that I think took their last check at almost 200 million post. Something I brought up with one of the YC partners a few weeks ago, and I was like, these valuations are higher. But he made this point. He said, I think we're just going to see higher exit values down the line. And so I think if we're betting on anything right now, that's going to be the case. It's also why I really like the program we're running, taking more bets and fishing in this pond where the odds are great. 6.5% of YC companies become unicorns. A quarter of those go on to become decacorns, according to Gary. You can still have incredible fund returns, even at this entry point. So we don't feel wholly deterred. With that said, we are very focused on YC, but we actually invested in a couple of companies that were not in the current batch in the last couple of months. They did get into YC for the winter batch. It doesn't count as non-YC companies exactly. That has to be another part of our strategy as well, finding some of those lower entry points before they start YC. And you see a lot of alumni investors working on that and trying to help companies with interviews. It's definitely a way in before that YC premium hits. But outside of YC, I'm still seeing $1 million seed rounds raising on 10. It's still out there. The YC premium, it's present for sure. But they're also incredible companies. Jay and I were so surprised when we started meeting the founders in the summer batch. It just felt like a higher order of ability that we hadn't seen previous. So yeah, I think we'll be okay.
Fund one was a target of 20 million bucks, 150 companies, around 75K initial checks. Where does this go from now? What does fund two and beyond look like for you guys?
Yeah, I think if Jay and I could hone in on the one thing that's been painful about the last couple of batches that we've invested in, is that our check size isn't bigger. There were companies where we felt like we wanted to be cutting in a $250,000 check, $300,000 check. And I think that there is room for that check size for us without having to sharpen our elbows. So where do we go from here? I think we can run a very similar program with a bigger initial check size and save more for follow-on. I think we will always want to play predominantly in YC's ecosystem. We're big admirers of how Box Group have approached investing and SV Angel. Jay and I feel like we can go on and raise funds 2, 3, and maybe even 4 and probably run almost an identical strategy where we're still not sensitive on ownership, but we are cutting bigger checks.
And as we come to a close, thank you so much for such a beautiful, genuine conversation today. Really appreciate the transparency. What's been the hardest part about building Spot as a new first-time GP, both you and Jay, and what's been the most rewarding?
I think the hardest part has been sourcing a lot of the fundraising conversations. It falls outside of our network a little bit. Our connections are founders and VCs. This is the community of people we've cultivated over time. I have found myself asking for favors of people that it's a little tough to get yourself to get the courage to be like, hey, can you help me? Here's what I'm working on. Whereas I always felt comfortable reaching out to a founder and being like, hey, this fund feels like a really good fit for my company. Would you make an introduction? So it's just kind of navigating a new world a little bit. And I think one of our superpowers as GPs in this fund is that we know failure really, really well. We failed every single day for years and years building our companies. There's a different profile of somebody who enters venture, who's been through the Ivy League circuit, has done business school, straight A's every day of their lives, and they come in and you have to fail as a VC. We're going to be wrong so much more than we're right. I think if your network is money managers, you learn how to handle that part of the business. And we've just had to learn it a lot faster. That's probably been the toughest part, is sourcing those conversations. The conversations themselves, I love. I find it really fun to pitch our fund. I think we have a very pitchable program. I enjoy that part of it. It's navigating the other side that has been more challenging. On the rewarding side, it's definitely been working with the founders. Every company we invest in, set up a group thread. And when those group threads are active, it's so fun for us. Oftentimes they're reaching out because they're having trouble nailing down a candidate that they want to hire who's super in demand. Just knowing that we're there helping them through tough times. I helped a founder through a co-founder breakup, drawing on my experience as a psychologist, not as a founder. One of the founders we invested in referred to us as young Ron Conways. I've never had a better compliment. It was so great. That part of it has been more rewarding and fun than I even predicted. It's been great to try to be really active in that way. I've not been active in that way as an angel investor because a lot of the investments I made were while I was building my own company or had just exited and was trying to do nothing. I've loved it. It's been great.
You just listened to another episode of the Slice Pod, hosted by Sunwoo and produced by Sunwoo, with a very tiny cameo by me, Fabry. Stay tuned for the next episode, which is going to drop in 2 weeks' time. This is going to be about a slightly odd one. I think that you guys are going to like it. We're going to go down a bit of an entomology rabbit hole for those that need to Google that, as we had to do a minute ago. We're talking about moths that are often overlooked by the mainstream venture investors, can turn into amazing returns. So stay tuned. Subscribe to this pod, whether it's on Stack, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen to your favorite podcast.